Konnichiwa, fellow Armchair General Sans. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 4. We're playing as Japan this time in this series. Okay, we're going to continue where I don't want to start. Well, partially I looked and saw that we didn't have any air bases because I was getting ready to send some air bases or some fighters and bombers to help cover here. We didn't have any air bases. I'm building some air bases here, so that's part of it. Part of it I also want to get done with, and it appears mostly done here with operations in Spain. And I'm wanting to set up a okay, well, wait a minute. Okay, we have these 4 divisions, right. I wanted to set up a second pincer movement here, so start there, and we're going to invade there, and that will take a little while to get things organized. Okay, we got up till 38 here, all of our industry. 3% off research time. Well, I want that, but check and see here. Anti-aircraft and anti-tank units do contribute to things other than shooting down aircraft and shooting up tanks. But our productivity is so limited, and we're not going to be facing any tanks for considerable time. So we're going to forego that, or significant enemy air. We could use mountain troops. There's a lot of rugged areas in China. How many days do we have here? Okay, we need about another 30 days. That one up there. They got what's that, 64 gates of some sort? $36. Okay, war with China, we now have the ability to start that, but we're not going to start it immediately, like I was talking about. A little later than the historical, because they was July-ish, I think, 37. I'm not very good on dates. Hard dates on many of these things, but okay. Let's see if we can get rid of the Germans out of China. They're giving some aid to China. Schneck, is that how you pronounce it? Was a rather good general, if I understand correctly, in World War I. He was sent to lead the military mission, German military mission in China. Now, when he was sent, I'm guessing 34, 35. Not exactly sure. Maybe earlier than that. I think it was after the Nazis came to power, though. We can modify government. He and his I don't know, staff, excuse me, training corps. It wasn't any combat troops. This was well before any significant Japanese action against China, other than Manchuria. And so it wasn't designed as a fight against Japan. It was seen supporting a nationalist government that Chiang Kai-shek's government very much was a nationalist government, not a fascist. I get tired of the left labeling everything by the most extreme. Oh, they were fascists. Oh, they were. Uncle of mine who's a teacher, rather good teacher, or was, he's retired. But my discussions with him, oh, Chiang Kai-shek and supporting of warlordism, blah 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 blah. How could you? Chiang Kai-shek never supported warlordism in China. He had warlordism in China, and he was dealing with it. He didn't want, now, as many China advocates, shall we say, dislike this sort of carving up of China, including even the Red China territory, in that the sort of what was going on in the 20s with these groups was much less apparent by the 36 period, much more centralized. They were, even when they were in the 20s, they were all still claiming to be part of China, and they weren't nearly as independent. Well, yes and no. They weren't their own states, that's for sure. But and they weren't necessarily pursuing like their own international policies. But if Chiang Kai-shek's government ordered 3 divisions from Yunnan or Guangxi, I don't know, click down here, a couple of divisions up to here, doesn't mean that they would ever come up here. They would, might get a, oh yes sir, we'll send them as soon as we can, and then they'd never get sent, and maybe more and more excuses. So it was including up until the end of, probably to the end of China, nationalist China, Chiang Kai-shek was very leery of letting any artillery pieces get out of his hands of units that were sort of in his sort of immediate proximity, immediate orbit, into generals, other generals, even those that appeared to be very pro Chiang Kai-shek, because artillery was, in the Chinese mind and battlefield, often the determining factor of victory or defeat. I can go into more of that later, but so there was a level of this going on, and I've agreed with Paradox's use of these things, because it's a game mechanic, because trust me, if Chiang Kai-shek was capable of building an army as good as the game mechanics sort of would generally allow, he would have done so. Okay, he was not an incompetent. I think he was very competent. He wanted a very strong army. He was dealing with the communists, and so they would have done so. So that there were a lot of other factors going on in China that kept that from happening. Now, a lot of them, excuse me, was just the inability to manufacture weapons and the inability to buy them. They did buy weapons. They did manufacture. I've looked them up, and some of the various major munitions and weapons manufacturers. And they were there, but they weren't. They didn't have enough output to, to properly arm up. What's that? 61 divisions right there. Oh, yeah, 61 divisions. Just right there. They didn't have enough output to equip all of those units. Okay, it's not that they didn't exist, and you can point them out to me, and I always like more information on that, because someday I'm going to get into looking at this very carefully. So they couldn't. It's not a wouldn't or other sorts of things. It's a couldn't. So how do you represent that in the game? And that's one of the ways, is trying to be giving diverse power structures within China. That's one way, not maybe the best way, but the way they've done it, and I agree that it helps with that, because quite honestly, like these 16 divisions, if they can protect their line of communication, should be able to move just about anywhere they want in China. Nothing China could put up against, say, these like 16 divisions, or these, as a group, that China could stop them. And it was, I think a lot of it could and should be shown as, and I have a few viewers, but I keep seeming to piss viewers off, so they go away, but is morale and organization was incredibly low for the overall Chinese military. Now you can point out, and like the 88th Division, and several other really good, really premier divisions. I think the 88th was more or less destroyed somewhere fighting around the Nanjing fight, but there was several other. I'm thinking 60, but 60 division. I don't remember all of them. The few that I sort of know of, and they were really premier units that were really well equipped and really well trained. I don't know their morale in actual combat compared to the Japanese. I have very high regard for the Japanese morale. Obviously they did very bad things, like in the rape of Nanjing, but they were very determined, where I don't know that even the better equipped and trained Chinese divisions match that. And so those are the exception versus the rule of mostly not. And so for Japan, the situation should be not the ability to, the question shouldn't be the ability to win battles. It should be the ability to hold and occupy territory. And like I say, take, on 6, partially just because I zoom out and there's a nice bunch, and 16 is several cores. I really believe that they could go just about anywhere in Greater China that they wanted to go, so long as they had a secure supply route, which could theoretically be air supply, though Japan never got that good on air supply. So they could go there, but having gone through a region doesn't mean that they're going to hold that region once they leave it. Whether it would be other Chinese military forces filtering in behind them, or just simply a general uprising and after that. So it should be a situation of the more territory Japan takes, the more occupation forces needed to maintain control of that, the less and less divisions are able to be put onto the offensive. So that it should be that case, not a hard battle winning case. Now get back to Schneck and his group. His and the 88th Division was one of the German trained divisions. So they sent over and were training up some good nationalist forces. It was I don't know how much it was funded by the German government, but there was definitely a fair amount of German military equipment sent into China. And at the time when that was starting, it was very unclear that Japan was going to try to do a general war against China and try to functionally, whether through a puppet state like they were doing in Manchukuo and Manchukuo, or which is to some degree is what they did everywhere, including the Philippines, set up a puppet state. But that was the puppet, at least in the Philippines, a puppet state in my opinion, in name only. It was purely a military occupation with a few collaborationists. So, but whether it would have been a functional puppet state or just claiming that there's a puppet state and having direct military control over it is a, more than just a labeling issue of things. So, it was very unclear that they were going to go that way, and by setting up improving nationalist China, one, they were fighting the communists, Hitler, of course, and the German high command, and Schneck was one of the ones that wasn't, to the best of my knowledge, any sort of supporter of Hitler. I could look him up on Wikipedia. You guys can too, of course. But he was sort of the traditionalist, pro-Kaiser kind of anti-communist. And so putting down the communists here, but it's also a counterbalance to the Soviet Union, because it stops the spread of international communism, but it's also a counterweight over here in the East. Maybe potentially, as they were seeing it alongside with the anti-Comintern pact, Japan, but they didn't, when that was started. Now, Schneck died of, I don't know, a heart attack or some other sort of thing when he was in China, and I'm picturing his face, but I forget who it was. Took over for him. It was one of his, I think his number two, and China took over for him. And so that they were, I don't know how much, like, some of the military equipment China was buying versus foreign aid kind of stuff, but it was looked as an international arms market, so that they were trying to develop a professional Chinese army, or at least a core professional element of it, and that was the German mission in China here. And they were also, I think, looking at maintaining various markets and other things. So that's what they were doing there. And so obviously, as Japan is moving into conflict with China and Japan, and Germany are getting closer and closer to Japan once the German advisors out. And they got that, and they were on for a while, after the Marco Polo Bridge incident and the going to war. I have a picture for the event of them leaving that shows at a train station. Lots of people. It's from sort of high above it. I don't know if it's an aerial photograph or probably just a tower nearby the train station, just looking down on them. Lots of people. You can't really tell specifically from looking at them that they were... Okay, we're getting our volunteers back, that they were Europeans, but you can sort of maybe tell somewhat by their clothes that they and a lot of their baggage was all being put on the train to leave. But on top of at least one of the long cars, it was almost a railway car length big Nazi flag with a swastika in the center, sort of a long banner version of it, and I think they were putting that on several of the cars in this train because they were worried about aerial attacks from the Japanese, not from the Chinese, of course, of the train, so that they were loading up the civilians, the military, just trying to get most all the German commercial and advisors out of the country. So now, as we were mentioning before, the other thing I want to see about doing is researching military police. So if we are successful in China, we will be able to occupy it effectively. That's now that we've built up some more military experience and okay, we don't have any more support. Almost there. Okay, now let's add our artillery and reconnaissance to our Marines. I don't know that we need any more training on these guys, because they'll get experience in combat fighting the Chinese. Let's send down, we've got the new Marine division here. Let's send him down to here. Getting our two divisions back. Okay, well, where did they... there we are. Select all. They're veteran, they're regular now. One of these sort of reinforced. Didn't have very many tanks. And I probably should add a tank unit to now. Let's get a little quicker and I can reorganize what's stood there. supply abilities. Yeah, okay. Let's see if we can do a naval invasion down here just to oh, I know what. Because we've already maxed out our evasion abilities up here. That's okay. Yeah, we are already straining into supply. Means still a deficit on equipment and tanks. Got plenty of artillery. A lot of fighters, so it looks like we don't need quite as much steel as we're bringing in. That helps a lot. Support weapons. Now, as somebody was questioning on the forum, the Hearts of Iron 4 forum, not for the thread, about some of these different texts that you're researching and what they affect. The big sort of rectangle, well, they are a rectangle, but the bigger ones, they represent researching a new level of equipment. And that only affects equipment newly produced. And so you would have to go over to producing a new level of equipment to get its benefit. The smaller square texts, they affect the units, and as you can see, the various types of units that they affect, so that they are sort of retroactive. Although you see a rifle here, this is more thought to be in the minds of the developers improved infantry equipment over improved a new rifle, meaning like theoretically binoculars and better shovels, or but it could be better boots, better canteens, whatever, that type of thing is what that represents. And since in the standard game you're not producing particular types of support equipment here, and of course it didn't even try to represent Japanese support equipment here, because it doesn't look like it to me. Since you're not producing, new machine gun types or mortar types or other things, they go to support the units. So those are retroactively effective. to the earlier types. Just if you had that question. Okay, we're gonna go with this. I wanted to do it for some time, but okay, well, I think we're ready for our invasion of China. Well, maybe that's not the case. I think we're more ready for the invasion of China than we were before. So, I think we're going to start that at the beginning of the next episode. So, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Please post comments, questions, suggestions. Sayonara. Until next time, for more Hearts of Iron.